Hello, Wake Up New Zealand, Sakey speaking. Well, Ardern and her political cronies in the toilet bowl of Wellington are very busy indeed, especially Andrew Little, Christopher, about increasing um, the authoritarian rules around making hate speech a crime. So this means the political thought police are going to be very busy. So, and what they've done is use the Christchurch terrorist attack as a reason for doing that. They see that as their reason. Yet you go back a good decade in the UN on their website, they already speak about hate crime, hate speech. They talk about small arms being confiscated from civilians. So all of this and the Christchurch terrorist attacks used to actually bring in certain gun laws and also hate speech. So, it's just a cop out, really. And the cop out they're using to control New Zealanders. So, the government's proposed new criminal offences for hate speech that say they'd be more stringent and more effective, and their proposals to intentionally stir up, maintain, normalising hatred. Anyone seen to be breaking the law, to incite violence, to incite assaulting, etc. People, what one person defines as taking on board what is seen as hate speech is different from one person to another. What may affect me may not affect you, and vice versa. So who defines this? The government defines it as to how they see it. So therefore, it's political policing. It's all about politics. It's all about global national politics, a democratic, socialist, Marxist, communist society. And this is the ideology of Ardern. So the government proposes punishment for such offences would be a minimum of 3 years and up to $50,000 fine, and provisions to protect transgender, diverse, and intersex people from discrimination. Current laws: speech that incites hostility against a person, groups on the grounds of colour, race, ethnicity, up to $7,000. And that's going to increase, of course. So hate speech. When people refer to hate speech, if governments refer to hate speech, the UN referred to hate speech as not clearly defined. That term, hate speech, hate crime, it cannot be clearly defined. So what they're using, and the UN note this, as incitement to. So they've changed the term to get around the not so clear hate speech term. So we think about political police. They're going to be extremely busy if these laws are determined, enforced, as will the New Zealand court system. More money out of taxpayers' pockets to pay for this. So the police role is to protect citizens, not to make law-abiding citizens into having criminal convictions. So what's going to happen? All this police time and these resources going into this and the finances, does that mean that law-abiding citizens are going to now be the criminals, and the criminals will be set free or just left to go about their business because we don't have enough police resourcing or finance for that? Considering gangs, since Ardern has been in, gangs in New Zealand have increased 50%. So, and the police are there to protect us from gang warfare. So the police will be their determination by this government, their role will be to increase monitoring of law-abiding citizens, stalking them. We've already got increased CCTV footage, and at peaceful rallies, when we oppose the narratives, we have police with CCTV cameras spying on us, and even the secret services at the last rally at the Auckland Museum. So whilst innocent law-abiding citizens are targeted, the real crims get away. They get away with murder. So it was reported by RNZ on the 25th of May this year, the police budget has been shrunk by more than $90 million this year. The overall budget dropped from last year, with road safety program taking 63 million hit, investigations losing 4.5 million, and primary response suffering 5.5 million drop. Cuts were made when gang membership increased by 50%, and that's when all the cuts were made. So there was also a doubling of serious assaults, and many of those increased serious assaults, were those that were mental health call-outs. And mental health is seriously suffering. There is crisis around mental health, and Ardern has failed New Zealanders on this one. So this will put more police, New Zealand police, under pressure. So Ardern has also failed the New Zealand police. The police are supposed to protect all citizens, not a favoured, privileged few. All United Nations governments, that's member governments, are following UN to follow international laws. And what they do is, an international law being non-binding as such, they then take that international law and then behind the closed doors of Wellington, they bring out bills, amend laws, and make international non-binding laws into domestic binding laws, which are enforceable and lawful. So, and we're talking about narratives that are seriously biased. So this global authoritarian control, therefore, consequently, national authoritarian control over New Zealand citizens, with that element of privilege and favouritism towards minority groups. And that is like the UNGP, the the Declaration of Rights of the Indigenous People, is about separatism, about apartheid. He Purpura, introduced by Ngāne Mahuta in January 2019 into Parliament, is about separatism, apartheid. UN and UN member nations are guilty of hate speech, hate crime, racial separatism, racial determination. And that's what they're about. It's not about all people. It's about a favoured few. This government is pro-separatism and pro-apartheid. So let's take a closer look at the UN and its international laws that hastily behind the closed doors of Wellington are enacted as being lawful and enforced over the people of New Zealand. So making this a serious question, you know, I too am questioning the Crown, who are in partnership with iwi Māori. What about the Crown? If New Zealand is a sovereign country, the authority of the Crown, representing the Queen of Britain, What about New Zealand when it gained independence from Britain? Why do we still have the Crown in New Zealand if we're independent of Britain? So, government website documents when the Treaty of Waitangi was signed and New Zealand became a colony of Britain. Britain ruled by a governor appointed by Britain, but European settlers wanted their own government. And that's what the government website says, New Zealand government. In 1907, it became a dominion of New Zealand. Later, they gained full legal independence when Parliament passed the Constitution Act in 1986. So they became fully independent of Britain in 1986. For God's sake, why have we got the Crown? I have to ask this question. Why are we using that figure of the Crown to bring about Indigenous people's rights and claims against law-abiding citizens, those taxpayers in New Zealand, every one of them, paying for what supposedly the Crown did in New Zealand when the Crown no longer really exists in New Zealand, is just a legal fiction. So back to the UN and hate crimes. How do the UN deal with genocide then? Murder of millions, forced sterilizations, forced abortions, rapes, millions imprisoned, genocide. How do they deal with that? Well, government of Australia, Britain, New Zealand recently passed a motion to take the CCP to task for all the crimes against humanity that they have committed over decades. So what happens there? Well, the UN Charter authorizes the UN Security Council to deal with crimes against humanity, such as genocide or torture, etc. However, the president of the UN Security Council is China, and China has veto rights. So they're never held accountable. They can do what they damn well like and get away with it. So what happens is the UN, when I ask, how can you take the individual to make them accountable, responsible for genocide? And what I came up with is their own country can take them and address them, investigate the genocide. Well, that's not going to happen in communist China, is it? Because if any individuals did that or groups, they'd soon disappear and God knows what would happen to them. So that's impossible. And then the UN says, well, there is another way. You can take them to the International Court, the International Court of Crimes, The Hague. So recently, the CCP were taken to The Hague, the International Criminal Court, and they would not investigate. They would not investigate the CCP. They refused to. On what account? They said because China is not a part of the International Court. Now, when you look at that, it makes you realise what a huge failure the UN is, what a huge failure all UN member nations governments are, and yet you have New Zealand government enforcing to bring about hate speech on law-abiding citizens. How is that? When they are sleeping in bed with trade deals, etc., with the CCP that commit genocide, torture, forced sterilisation, rapes, forced abortions, etc., and many, many tortures, I tell you. And it's all evidential based. And Chinese people who escape that regime, they are scared to talk up. Anywhere they go in the world, they never know whether they're safe or not. It doesn't matter where they are, because there's always the fear if they speak up, they're going to be dragged back to the mainland in China, to Beijing, to be persecuted, prosecuted, probably never to be seen again. And that is a huge fear for those people who have escaped the Chinese regime. They never really escape the regime. So UN documents, well, you can investigate those. They're all on there. So the International Criminal Court is a total failure. The UN is a failure. Our government is a damn failure. So the criminal court itself is a crime in itself, a crime against humanity, because these international courts, the UN member country governments, they're allies of those that commit these horrific genocides and tortures. So they're guilty, guilty, guilty. So the UN, if you go to their documentation on their website, they take a massive part, they've got playing a massive global part in separatism and apartheid across the world. They're all a part of these hate crimes, allowing genocide and torturing of millions. They choose, the UN member countries choose to ignore that. But do you know what? They also ignored the genocide that's happening to Christians globally. The BBC, there was a report by Jeremy Hunt, MP, he's a foreign minister, where he publicly spoke about the genocide, near genocide of Christians across the world. And it's horrific. So who's taking these countries to task, these governments and these individuals who are committing these horrific crimes against Christians? No one, because that is ignored, never mentioned. You never hear our government talk about it. So we have UN member countries willing to adopt UN information on hate speech, and the minority privileged get away with it. So a UN global tactic that our Ardern government welcomes the UN term used in hate speech. It's not hate speech, it's not hate crime, it's determined. The term is determined as incitement to. It can be used very broadly, and it can reward this political, socialist, Marxist, communist dictatorship we've got going on in the world today. This dictatorship that's coming from the cesspit of Wellington. So the political thought police becoming internationally binding, globally encouraging, promoting racism, separatism, apartheid, and discrimination. And that's who is guilty of all these things, not law-abiding citizens. So this is broad and it's extremely dangerous. It's global, it's national, it's about divide and conquer people, populations, where populations will destroy each other. And that's the name of the game, divide, conquer. The fox in the hen house. Yet we have New Zealand and other member UN countries that welcome the UN and have done for decades. So This is not the peace they preach. This is what we're living under now, is what they call utopia, the promised utopia that's going to get even worse than it is now. This is a politically motivated ideology of socialism, Marxism, communism, authoritarian control over the people of New Zealand. The communist divide. What is the only way to actually stop this? Call a halt to it. What are the solutions? We need some solutions. And while we're in that game of divide and conquer, we are never going to get the solutions. So, he iwi, Tahi, Tatou. We are all one people. And until we get that into our thick skulls and act on that, we will remain at huge risk. Our freedoms will be diluted completely. We will be like sheep to the slaughter. So what we need to do is put human back into human beings and call a halt to de-humanization. And God save New Zealand. And when hope knocks at the door, may faith answer it. We must replace warped morals with Christian values, Christian beliefs, Christian values. Stop the destruction of the traditional family, because that is what the intention of the UN and this government is doing, destroying the family unit. To do that, they are bringing in warped morals and trying to get rid, hastily, of Christian values and morals and beliefs. Those were all part of raising a family. So people, please share, and subscribe. Thank you.